you for staying back and coming to my tour of Israel presentation. So last year I had a sabbatical, and as part of that sabbatical, well, the main thing that I did was to go to Israel with Oak Hall Holidays, and that's an organised tour with somebody who really knows their stuff, which is really helpful, not just from the fact that they tell you about, you know, they know the...
Oh, I'm so sorry.
The pictures we're at the cinema, so get the popcorn out in a minute.
Correct.
Thank you, Usherette.
Sorry.
Not just that they know all about the tour, you know, the history of the things, but thank you. But they also they know how to talk to security. You know, when the guy with the machine gun gets on your coach to check who's there, they know how to tell him who we are and how to get us through those security checks, but in the best way. This is a picture of me in the Dead Sea, floating serenely. The camera wasn't there when I slipped, fell and plunged beneath the waters and discovered that hypersalinated water doesn't just sting, it burns. This was about 45 minutes later when I'd started to recover and I felt brave enough to try again. And it was worth getting in the water because it was 45 degrees centigrade down there. It's a very hot place, the lowest place on Earth. But most of what I'm going to be talking about is the biblical, historical stuff. The tour actually was round backwards from what it would normally be. Normally they'd start off in the Galilee area, and then the second half would be in Jerusalem. But for various reasons, the hotel bookings and that meant we started in Jerusalem and then went to the Galilee area. But I'm just going to do a presentation picking out things and doing it in order that broadly speaking follows Jesus' life. So we'll start with Bethlehem, for instance, and then we'll go to Galilee, where his ministry is, and then we'll end up in Jerusalem, where, of course, his death and resurrection happened. So, Bethlehem. So when you go to Bethlehem, this is the first thing that's confronted. You're in Israel, but you have to go through border control to the Palestinian Authority area, which, as you know, this is a troubled land of conflict, and there's more security certainly coming into Tel Aviv airport than I've ever seen anywhere else. They take their security so much more seriously, and of course, going to somewhere like Bethlehem, you have to cross that security, and you have to get the guy with the machine gun getting on board your coach, checking that there's no terrorists. So you've got these border walls. So this is us going to little town of Bethlehem. How still we see thee lie, above thy deep and dreamless sleep. You know, it's that. This is Bethlehem, the little town. Well, you go in there and you've got this. There's this sign I saw: "Welcome to Bethlehem. We welcome you on your journey as followers of the. I think it's something. The followers of the Prince of Peace. Pray for the freedom of Palestine." So this is a sign that basically Muslims have put up saying, "Welcome Christians. We're really pleased that you're here." And we want you to sort of understand that our freedom is important. But I think it's not just their freedom they're interested in, because the Christians come with Christian money. And so Bethlehem has done very well. This is going into Bethlehem, and then this is a gift shop. This is just one of the things I took a picture of when I was in the gift shop. It's a nativity set. So if you're going to buy a nativity set, you want to buy it in the home of the nativity, don't you? Bethlehem. And I mean, this gift shop was just full of nativity sets, really lovely, ornately carved things, and other statues and statuettes and other religious iconography if you want to buy it. This particular one, I took a picture of it because it's $35,000 worth of nativity set. And I thought about texting the leadership team, saying an idea for a display at Christmas, but then decided I wouldn't be able to fit it in my suitcase. It's, I mean, it was about this high, this tall, that's how big it was. But there's a lot of money to be made, and these guys running the shop, I think they might have been Muslims, but they were selling a lot of Christian stuff, and there was, you could see these little statues, and we were guessing, so that one's Elijah, that one looks like Moses, I reckon, looking at the clues, that one's David, but then we came across this character we didn't recognise, and it was the guy who did the Mormon book of, the Book of Mormon, I forget his name now. But basically, they'll sell to the Catholics, they'll sell to whoever. So there's a lot of money to be made, and there's a big church there. This is the Church of the Nativity, that you go in and so they say, you go to the place where Jesus was born. So they claim to have found the actual stable and the actual place where he was born. Now, how anybody could ever know where that was, I don't know. But this is inside the Church of the Nativity, very ornate, very rich. And this is down in that crypt. You go down, down, down into the sort of cellar of the church, and then you get to the very place where they say Jesus was born, and you queue up so you can go and write your little prayer and put it in an envelope and then get down. And people were kissing the stone, and there was a priest standing there taking their money. And I must say that was one of the most upsetting things to me. Sorry, this does get better. This is a more interesting talk, but I have to say this is one of the things when you go to the Holy Land. There's a lot of stuff there that's very unholy. There's a lot of stuff that's quite shocking. And I think one of the most shocking things was seeing a guy standing by the supposed birthplace of Jesus, accepting donations so that people could kiss the stone upon which the baby Jesus was supposedly made. But this is one of the really positive and exciting things. There was a bookshop in Bethlehem, a Christian bookshop that's been there for, I don't know, around 20 years or so. But it's run by Christians, and they have got a genuine heart to teach people about Jesus, to tell them about Jesus, and it's a real mission heart. They don't make any profit. It's a charity, and they make a loss most of the time, but they rely on churches outside encouraging them and keeping them going, and they sell a lot of Christian literature, and they get Muslims coming in, and they say they've got a lot of people who are secret believers, basically, because it's very hard, obviously, in that kind of a territory to be a Muslim and to believe in Jesus and to follow him. So there's some really encouraging things that you get to see. And they've got a coffee bar there as well. So you can go in, you can get a coffee, you can have a chat and sit down on some really comfy chairs. Nazareth. Nazareth, where Jesus spent his childhood, grew up, very small village, and this is where they've excavated and then, to a certain extent, recreated the village which they feel may have been the first century Nazareth, where Jesus was born, not born, but where he grew up. They've got a lot of things like the people in period dress doing different jobs around the place, and some livestock. They grow some plants, the sort of vegetables that they would have grown in this communal growing area that the village would have had. There's a guy with a donkey, a threshing donkey, I think, or something like that. can't remember what it was now. So that's interesting. That's the original village, a sort of small, poor place that, as John's Gospel, Nathaniel said to Jesus, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" It didn't have a particularly good reputation. Now, Nazareth is a big, built-up place. Again, it's built on the reputation of being the home of Jesus, and it was probably the most affluent place that I saw while we were in that country. That there's the nicest cars, the nicest buildings. This is a church in Nazareth, the Central Church. And it was a Friday we were there. So this was the gathering of the Muslims for their time of prayer, worship. And there must have been around 200 or 300 of them in the open air there. Very, very loud, very, very clearly there. So that was Nazareth. And then, Sea of Galilee. Now this was the whole second half of the tour was actually based out of Galilee. We stayed in a hotel on the banks of the lake, and it is, it's a beautiful thing. It's lovely. If you were here a few weeks ago, I was saying about the size of Galilee it's a big lake. It's 8 kilometres across. It's about 13 kilometres from top to bottom. It's this place that if there's a storm and you're in a small boat in the middle of it, you're a long way from the shore. That's why I guess they called it a sea and not a lake. And it's just lovely. It's beautiful. And you can tell people when they go to Galilee, they say just what a place of peace it is. Now, my guess is that in the first century it wasn't so peaceful because there were settlements and villages and towns all around the shore, and it was a big industry. It was where people lived because they got the fish from there. That was a massive industry for them. Oh, who's this good-looking fella?
Local fisherman.
Yes, it's Peter at work, isn't it? No. But now, most of those villages and towns, they've gone, and so you've got the main settlement. There's a city of Tiberias, but apart from that, there's a few small places, very small places, but not a lot of life, and it's not a big, fishing is not the industry it once was, so it's all sort of quietened down now. But there's a lot of ruins for you to see. And there's a lot of tourism, of course. Everybody wants to go on the boat on Galilee. So this is one of the towns around the area of Galilee, Chorazin. I went there. So that's a ruin. This was a place that Jesus went and ministered, and it's interesting, these black stones. It looks like sort of volcanic stone that's these buildings were made from, but nothing there because I say the industry's all gone now. That was a sort of I don't know, a prairie dog or something. Yeah. Louise said, "Keep them interested. Put some of your pictures of animals."
Tell her it worked.
Yeah. It's cute, but unfortunately I didn't get a very clear picture of it, as you can see. But there were some cute little prairie dogs scurrying around over the ruins of Chorazin. And then we came on to Capernaum, another one. Now Jesus spent a lot of time in Capernaum, probably lived there for quite a while, went into the synagogue of Capernaum, it tells us. And you can see that there's, you can make out the houses, the ruins. These are not very huge places. These are small villages, these towns, but they were sort of well known to the Bible times. So this is the synagogue. Those white stones are not the first century synagogue. It's been rebuilt since then, but it was on the site of the original synagogue. And then Tiberias is the one place around the area of Galilee that is still active and alive, if you like, with people actually living and making a living there. And this is a lizard that I saw. So I mean, it's a lovely place to see, the Sea of Galilee, and it's worth going to in order to get a sense of this is the place, this is the area that Jesus did most of his ministry. He would get in a boat and he would travel to another town, and then he'd get in a boat and he'd travel to another town, and you start to think, this is why he seemed to pick on fishermen so much, and he didn't pick exclusively on fishermen, but it made sense to pick fishermen to be his disciples because, number one, that's where he was. Fishing was a massive part of life. And number two, if you're going to get from place to place, it's good to have some experienced boatmen to take you, because they're never going to get scared when there's a storm on the Sea of Galilee, are they? They know what they're doing. So that was the whole Galilee leg, and then the Jerusalem leg of the tour, where you get to see, and I mean, Jerusalem is there is so much there, and it's one of these places that, a bit like London, but nothing like London, but with London you can walk a few paces and you're seeing one historical site to another. And with Jerusalem, it's the same thing. You're like tripping over history everywhere you walk. But it's split up into quarters. You've got the Jewish quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, and I think, is it the Coptic? So there's 4 quarters, and the fourth one is the smallest one, which is why I've gone and forgotten it. But the Muslim and the Jewish quarter are the 2 biggest there. And so this is what you would see if you're walking towards Jerusalem. So when Jesus came to Jerusalem, you would approach by coming over the Mount of Olives. And when you stand on the Mount of Olives, you look down over. There's the valley there in between the Mount of Olives and then that hill upon which the city of Jerusalem is built. And you just get that sense, that's what you would see. As you're coming over the Mount of Olives, you'd see Jerusalem sort of spread out before you. Here's a picture of it. I'm going to stop you going busy. But you can see, you're looking down across the tombs. So this is a Jewish burial site, and apparently it's one of the most expensive places in the world to get buried. As a Jew, this is where you want to be buried, on the Mount of Olives, because this is where the Messiah is going to come in Jewish belief. So you want to be there for him to raise you up. And so you're looking down from the Mount of Olives into that valley, and then as you go up, you can see the dome of the mosque, which is approximately where the temple would have been in Jesus' day. And the temple dominated. So this is the model of Jerusalem, first century wise, and you can see how the temple there, that square court, would have been absolutely huge. And it just dominated, and it was this idea that Jerusalem wasn't a city with a temple, it was a temple with a city attached to it. It was that was the dominant thing that you would see. There's a close-up of the dome of the mosque at the moment, and in the foreground you can see there's some of the city wall that remains, but there's hardly any of the temple walls. You know, the temple and the city was destroyed, basically knocked down by the Romans in AD 79, and then some of the city wall has been rebuilt, but the temple was never rebuilt. It was, and now of course it's a mosque, and what remains of the original temple wall from the 1st century is what's called the Western Wall, or sometimes known as the Wailing Wall, and that's where the Jews would go and they would pray, they would wail to God, because that's all that's remaining of the temple, and that's the wall there. And you can, I mean, I don't know if you can see how tall it is when you really look at the people who are standing right against the wall. It's a huge thing that's probably about 2/3 the size that it would have been. The top hasn't been placed, or hasn't, there's top of it still there. So, and that's just a very small segment of what would have been this huge structure that dominated the city. Now, when I was there, it was blinding a little bit because it's all this white sort of sandstone, and the sun's shining because it's not Britain, it's the Middle East. So you can imagine what this temple would have looked like as you came over the Mount of Olives, as you saw this thing gleaming, and then as you navigated your way around Jerusalem, you would have been aware of where you were. Yeah, there's a temple. Wherever you look, you can see the temple. This gleaming structure of Israel's pride, which for the Jews would be the source of their pride. And of course now, it's just this kind of 2,000-year sadness. For years, it's not existed. It's set for this little section of the wall. So, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Garden Tomb. I'm going to look at those two places because there are these two competing claims to where Jesus died and was buried. So he was buried nearby to where he died, according to the Bible, and so you've got these two locations where that's said to have happened. And the first is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which has historically been the traditional place of the death and the burial and resurrection of Jesus since about the 4th century. It was around Emperor Constantine's time. He actually sent his mother, Helena, off to Jerusalem, and he said, find the important places. So I think she might have found where Jesus was supposedly born, and that's where they built the Church of the Nativity. She also found this location and said, this is where he died and was buried, and they built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now bear in mind, Jerusalem had been flattened. So how she was able to identify where anything was supposed to be or where anything had happened, I don't know. She was sainted, and maybe some people, there was passed down in tradition, it was right here, and there was some kind of identifying. But it's whether the Church of the Holy Sepulchre really was the location or not. Well, it's challenged by the Garden Tomb. We'll come to that in a minute. This is what it's like now. You go in, and this is the place, right just in the entrance, you've got this stone, just here where these women are kneeling down and touching it, where Jesus' body is said to have been laid after the crucifixion. And so people were coming in and kissing the stone. There's some more of a view of that, the stone that he was laid on. This is not a great picture, but it's trying to show the place where the crucifixion supposedly happened. So they built this church over it all, so you can't really see anything that might look like, the mount upon which the cross stood. Of course not. It's an altar now. And it's covered in paraphernalia, religious paraphernalia. and people are worshipping there. And then you go down, 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 down again, deep into the depths beneath the church, and you find the tomb of Jesus. So they say. This is where he was laid. So it's very hard to relate to and to think, I mean, you know, again, maybe it's true, maybe it really was here that it happened, but it doesn't look anything like what it would have looked like. It looks like a religious altar. So that's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's a very religious place. It's difficult to relate to it, to be honest, but people go on pilgrimages there, and as I say, you see a lot of people kissing these stones and taking hope from it, I guess. This is the other place that's a more recent place that argues that this is where they think Jesus might have died and been buried, and it's the Garden Tomb. So this is the 1800s that it was identified. Somebody, this was, bear in mind that for many, many years, these parts of Jerusalem were under Muslim control, the Ottoman Empire, and Westerners had very little access. So there was during the time of the Ottoman Empire, the Muslims gave, at various points, limited access to places like the Holy Sepulchre. So people would come and worship there. But it was in the 1800s that a British guy who was there as a diplomat or something was looking from the city walls across to this cliff face, and he saw a shape that looked like a skull. So there's me, that's my skull in front of what looks like, hang on, we got there's a light, isn't there? There's a pointer. So you can see two eyes, eye and an eye, a nose shape there. So it's a kind of skull shape to get me out of the picture and use a bit more. So this is what he was looking at, thinking, is this the skull? If so, then the crucifixion would have happened up here. Now, what's up there now is a place that a Muslim burial ground, so it's quite sacred to Islam. So there's definitely not going to be any excavation or tourism up there. You couldn't go. I mean, you could probably go up there, but you might get into a bit of trouble. And as you can see, they've built a coach park underneath the skull. But next door to where the skull is, archaeologists excavated this area that they found was a garden. And it had a wine press in it. So it was a functioning garden. It belonged to a family. And within this garden, there was a tomb. And as I showed you earlier, a typical tomb would have a small circular entrance, but this tomb it did have a door-shaped entrance. Now this wasn't the excavators that made it into a door. This was made into a door around the 1st or 2nd century. So it was turned from a tomb into being more accessible. It was a tomb, but it was made more accessible, I should say. And so they started to put together the pieces, finding, well, there's, you know, when you look at the biblical record, the skull, the place called the Skull is where Jesus was crucified. Nearby there was a garden. That's where he was laid in the tomb. So there's various pieces of evidence. Plus, this tomb, something was made of it. There was more than just a tomb. So this is when you go in the tomb, you can see where they would lay the body of a dead person. And then you see on the wall this symbol of, in the early centuries, that was a symbol of Christian worship. So they unearth a tomb that was turned into a room used for Christian worship. Now, I say you wouldn't. It's not as big as this room. It was tiny. It was like a box room in a house. I mean, it's you go in and there's just room to manoeuvre and put a couple of bodies. There were 2 spaces for laying bodies down and a little bit of space next to it. So if you're going to use a tomb as a place of worship, you'd have to ask why. And so if it was being used for worship in the 1st or 2nd century, that points to it being quite possibly because people were recognising this was where Jesus was laid. And to be honest, it was a much nicer place to go. The Garden Tomb is run by a charity that's based in Britain, and it's run by Christians, and they maintain it as a much more peaceful place than, and it's not had a great big church with a load of religious paraphernalia put all over it. So again, is this really the place where Jesus was buried and where the resurrection took place? Possibly. I think it's got a better claim because it's actually put together archaeology with the Bible evidence. But we don't know, do we? Never know for sure. Modern Jerusalem, of course, well, you've got a few clues I've given you earlier about the conflict and stuff going on. And modern Jerusalem is a place it's a very busy place. When you're in the Muslim quarter, there's these very narrow streets that you've got market traders on either side selling all sorts of things. They're experts at selling to Americans and British and other Europeans who come, and they know exactly the kind of things that you're going to want to buy and take back home for you. And I mean, this guy who sold me this overpriced cushion cover knew that my wife would love it, and he knew that my wife would hate me if I didn't buy it. And what's more, if I didn't buy it, his children would starve to death. But that's what you kind of deal with, isn't it? But it was, a real sort of sprawling, exciting atmosphere of stuff. And then when you get to the Jewish quarter, a very different feel, much more organised, ordered, and much more wealth. It's just, the whole thing is more modern and well funded. And you've got a lot of the buildings that look like this with writing on the side. There's a lot of sense of the history and the pride in their history. But, and I haven't got any photos that show this particularly, but a lot of the buildings had the names of people on the side and families on the side, and then it would say where they were from. Wisconsin, or Phoenix, or Texas. And you start to think, oh. So the picture of Jerusalem that I started to get was of this very poverty-stricken Muslim sector, and then this very well-off Jewish sector from American money, built on American money. And you think, I'm starting to understand some of that hatred now. It was quite eye-opening, but really, really fascinating. I mean, both sector, both quarters, the Jewish and the Muslim, were fascinating to go to, and both really welcoming people, lovely people. The Jewish quarter, you do see a lot of people with machine guns in military uniform, and they look like they're about 15 years old. But I'm sure they were older than that, but I think they all do the Jews all do their military service very young, and you see them around the city. This is interesting. So now, this is looking up at the city walls from that valley. So when you come in and you're looking down from the Mount of Olives, you look down into the valley, and and then the city is built up on the hill. So this is looking up at the city walls, and so these aren't first century city walls, they've been rebuilt, but much to the same specifications as the old city walls. And you've got this eastern gate called the Golden Gate, and when you look at it close up, can you see anything interesting about this gate? It's all stoned up in it, so you can't get through that gate. And anybody know why it's been bricked up? Because the Jews believe that when the Messiah comes through the Mount of Olives, down into the valley, he's going to come up, and he's going to enter Jerusalem through the Golden Gate. The Muslims control that part of the city, so they bricked it up to stop that Messiah from getting anywhere interesting. So, I mean, it's fascinating because, of course, I mean, when the second coming happens, we know that the Golden Gate isn't going to stop him at all, is it?
Yes, it's also, there's a geological fault along there, and of course in the Revelations it talks about the ground splitting open, and it's almost, you could imagine, the gates.
Yeah, I mean, will the ground split open and the gates are going to open despite the bricking up, because there's this geological fault in the book of Revelation. Our tour guide was convinced that the second coming would happen on the Mount of Olives. I'm not convinced of that, but okay. Benefits of archaeology. So this is just a sort of final thing that some of the reflections from other things. I've not shown you even, there's some sections that I've not talked about at all, some of the places that I saw. But as I reflected on going around it, some of the benefits of the archaeological things that are going on. So we all know the story of Jericho and how Joshua led the army across the Jordan, led them, the first city they came to was Jericho. They marched around the city, the walls came tumbling down, and of course historians said there was no city of Jericho at that time. Jericho is a much more modern city, and you can see the modern city beyond this thing, but this little hill there, this area there, that's where they started excavating more recently to find an ancient city with ancient buildings that went back to the time before Joshua. So this place that supposedly didn't exist, turns out it did, but the reason that you couldn't see it very clearly was because the walls came tumbling down. So this building, they've dated it as being 8,000 years old. This is in Jericho. And it's believed to be the oldest man-made building. Don't have many unman-made buildings, do you? It's the oldest building in the world, 8,000 years old. Again, what do we know? Maybe it is. And this is looking out from that hill where Jericho, the ancient Jericho was. You're looking out across the modern city, looking towards the water, the Dead Sea there, and the River Jordan feeding into the Dead Sea. You can just about see it in the distance, in the haze. And you realise, yeah, actually, if you were a watchman standing on the walls of Jericho, you would have been aware that there was a mass of people on one side of the Jordan. You would have seen that. And you would have seen that they got to the other side of the Jordan, and you would have thought to yourself, how did they do that? How did they get across there? I mean, maybe they did see that the waters parted and the people crossed, just like in the days of Moses. But that's what the people on the city of Jericho would have been aware of, that there was this army marching towards them who had some supernatural ability to get across water. And that would have put the fear of God literally into them. So that's Jericho. And that's a little bird that I saw in Jericho. Yeah, lovely. This is a place called Hazor. It's in the Bible. Again, it's during the time of Joshua, his conquest. He went to Hazor and they burned this Hazor down to the ground. Now, Hazor was then built up. So what you can see there are two layers. The top layer, the smaller, whiter stones, I guess. This bit from this line upwards is much later, after Joshua's time, but the bit below, the foundations are from pre-Joshua, and the stones all cracked due to the intense heat. So it's these things that confirm, just give you that confirmation that what we read in the Bible, it's not myths and made-up stories. There's historical, archaeological evidence. And it means that, we can say, it's difficult to say for sure. These tours are advertised as walk where Jesus walked. You don't know where Jesus walked, and particularly because Jerusalem was so wrecked that we can't be sure of any of the places. You go to the Garden of Gethsemane, it's just a garden that they've called Gethsemane. It's not necessarily where Jesus actually prayed. But this is the steps of coming back to Jerusalem, the steps leading up to the temple. And this is leading up to where people would have entered the temple. And some of the original first century steps are still there. They've been mostly rebuilt, but there are still some exposed first century steps. So when Jesus came to the temple, these are the steps that he would have used, some of which, you could say this is stand where Jesus stood, more or less. Except you can't, because they won't let you stand on the actual first century steps, of course, because you just erode them. But that's me standing just below the steps. So you get close to places where Jesus must have stood here, must have gone here. Bethesda. This is the pool of Bethesda where Jesus said to a man, a man wanted to wash in the pool in order to be healed, and Jesus just healed him, just like that. This is great, because I always thought the pool of Bethesda was just a big circular pool, but it's like a Roman baths type thing. It's got structure. There's a couple of pigeons at the pool of Bethesda. And so that's a place that you're pretty sure, we know where Bethesda is. We know where that pool is, because that remains, and you can see the place where Jesus would have gone. This is the pool of Siloam. It's the place. Anybody remember where that featured? Why that was a significant pool? Pool of Siloam. Jesus did a healing there. What it was that there was the blind man that Jesus rubbed mud into his eyes and said, now go and wash the mud off in the pool of Siloam. So we've identified that, some of these places you can identify, you can be pretty sure this is the place. Whereas a lot of the places like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you might as well toss a coin. Is it there or not? And no, toss a coin is 50-50. It's very little chance. This is not where Jesus walked, but this is where Hezekiah probably would have walked, because this is Hezekiah's tunnel. This is something you can do, where you go down from the city of David, which is the original Jerusalem, and you can go down into this tunnel that's been cut out from the rock during Hezekiah's time. So we're talking 3,000 years ago. They cut a tunnel that led from the pool of Siloam, which was outside of the city walls, and the tunnel led into the city wall. So it was channeling water from the springs into the city, and it was a secret tunnel. So if they were attacked, their water supply would not be cut off if they were under siege. So there's this secret tunnel that you can, it's like this wide, and you walk down it, and it takes 45 minutes to walk from one end to the other. And it's deep, deep under the bedrock, under the city. And they carved that 3,000 years ago, starting at either end and meeting in the middle. How do they do that? Even in modern times, I don't know how they do that, let alone 3,000 years ago with a hammer and chisels. And you can walk it now, and it's an incredible experience, because you're just walking through darkness, and you put a torch on, and the person in front of me, because every so often you have to slow down and stop because people in front have bunched up a bit. And every time we stopped, that person who was walking in front of me, she was going. So if you don't like small confined spaces, but it's incredible. So you start off in the city of David, and you emerge at the pool of Siloam 45 minutes later, and there's ankle deep water the whole way, so it's very level. This is, there's no, I don't think there are any other contenders to be the tunnel of Hezekiah. You can read about them talking about Hezekiah building this tunnel to bring water into the city. I don't think there's anybody saying, oh no, it wasn't that tunnel, it's another one. So walk where Hezekiah walked, if you can take small spaces. And this comes back to the garden tomb, which again I think is probably a better contender in terms of the biblical, putting together the biblical clues for where Jesus' burial and resurrection took place. And I mean, that's a striking thing. I was able to go inside this tomb, and there, couldn't actually touch the spot where his body was supposedly laid, but it's right in front of me, just there sort of thing. And I'm standing there thinking there's a really good chance that the resurrection happened there. Why do I not feel more excited and profoundly moved? And I mean, I've done this whole walk where Jesus walked, and I've gone to these places, and it is pretty striking. But there's something that actually I'd have thought it would move me more, and I would be more spiritually alert, awakened, so to speak. But the tomb is empty. That's what matters. He's not there anymore. Jesus is alive, and his spirit can be with us here and now. And you don't have to go to the Holy Land, as they call it, to be close to him. And actually, a lot of things about the Holy Land are quite off-putting, as I've said. But it is a lovely place to go, and it has, put flesh on the bones of a lot of biblical passages. If you are ever wanting to go, if you've never been, a few weeks ago when I was preaching at Buckingham Church, this woman who organises these trips gave me a couple of leaflets. So she does this regularly, apparently, every year. So this is for July, 27th of July to 5th of August 2024. So if anybody has got a spare 2,500, or you could go with Oak Hall Holidays, who I went with. They're another one that do very good tours. And it's worth doing if you can, because it does bring to life in a certain way and give clarity the geography of the Bible and the sense of place. So I'm going to finish there. And I think I've overrun my time now. Thank you, Audrey. Yes, I've overrun my time. So is there any questions?
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, yeah.
Thank you for listening. That's the Sea of Galilee. I got up really early and watched the sunrise on my last day there.